Welcome all of you. So, today we will be starting with a new topic, that is environmental impact assessment. Earlier we studied about environmental clearance, what is the process for environmental clearance, and in that this term was frequently used, EIA, that is environmental impact assessment. So, in detail we are going to study it in this lecture. So, today's lecture would start with what is EIA, what are different types of EIA, and there is a proper flow chart or different stages involved in the EIA process. Just like environmental clearance, there was a proper flow chart. Similarly, there is a flow chart of different stages in EIA that we will look at, and then one case study of Tehri Dam, how EIA can be applied to a real world case study. So, starting with environmental impact assessment. So, it should be like environmental impact EIA, the short form. So, it is a planning and decision making tool to anticipate likely environmental impacts that may arise from any proposed project, and it also includes mitigation measures and strategies. So, it is to be done before a project is implemented or started. So, that is why like environmental clearance, it is required before starting the project. It is like a green signal for starting the project. So, when we do EIA, it actually tells us what are all the possible environmental impacts that may arise because of different activities that are involved in the project. And not just that, when we know or when we could predict the environmental impacts, we should also be ready with the plan for mitigating those impacts. What would be the strategies and measures to reduce or minimize those impacts. So, accounting all these things in a form of a report will generate EIA report. So, EIA is that tool which will help us to do this. It was introduced in India in 1978 with respect to river valley projects. River valley projects, as the name suggests, it has to do something with the rivers and valleys. So, mainly the projects like construction of dams or deviation of waters of rivers, so that we can use it for different purposes. For example, if we deviate the water of river in the canal, we can use it for irrigation or agriculture. If we construct a reservoir or a dam to hold the water of river, it can be used for hydropower generation purpose. So, those projects which involves movement or transfer or storage of water in the rivers is called as river valley project. And these projects typically have huge environmental impact, because sometimes you have to cut down trees or forest, sometimes you have to relocate or people living in those nearby areas, and it also involves like construction of new civil infrastructure which will have a lot of air emissions, water pollution as well as noise. So, these projects were the first one for which EIA was introduced in India. Later, this EIA legislation or notification was extended or enhanced to include other projects. Almost at present 30 plus different categories of projects are there for which EIA is mandatory. The other thing, the important aspects of EIA are not just environmental impact assessment, but also the risk assessment, the environmental management and post product monitoring. So, these are some aspects around which EIA revolves. So, we account for like what are the risks associated with the proposed activity or a project, how environment is going to get affected and how we are going to manage it, and if there is any product or process or a company or even a compliance, once we get it or once we sell it, how do we do the monitoring of the performance of product post it is manufactured and sold. So, there are different environmental components of EIA. It is just like the biotic and abiotic, but if you look at it from a science perspective, the EIA moves around earth sciences, life sciences and social sciences. So, when we talk about earth sciences, the climatic or air, water, soil, geology, all these factors account for environmental components of EIA. So, for a given project or for any activity in a given project, if it is having impact on any of these components, that needs to be evaluated. Then in social sciences, it will be mainly dealing with humans, cultural heritage, landscaping, or the aesthetics or the beauty or appearance of the location, real estate, and how it impacts social interaction, cultural interaction. So, all those things would come under the social sciences category. And on life sciences category, it will be the terrestrial and aquatic ecology primarily, because the other is the atmosphere, the air atmosphere, I think, which is taken care of or which is covered in earth sciences category. So, the biodiversity or the flora and fauna as well as the habitats dealing with terrestrial or aquatic ecology covers in life sciences. So, these are three broad domains and these are subdomains or subcomponents of EIA which need to be accounted for in a rapid as well as comprehensive EIA. We will look at the types of EIA. So, there are different types of EIA based on what we are like categorizing it, but mostly it is based on like the content or like the detailing. If we want to do a quick or a short term EIA for some expansion project, we would go for rapid EIA, and if we have long time and the project is a big one, we would need a comprehensive EIA. So, rapid EIA is a quick assessment, typically 3 months, for predicting mainly the adverse impacts, okay, and data is collected for 2-3 months or 1 season maximum in a year, and example is industrial expansion which requires fast approval. Imagine there is already a industry in place or a refinery, and they just want to set up one small unit for some extra chemical using most of the existing facilities. So, such kind of expansion based approvals, they need fast approval. So, they may not need to do comprehensive EIA, because that comprehensive EIA might have been done for the entire refinery already. So, for that one additional unit, they will just go for rapid EIA, and our comprehensive EIA is applicable typically for large projects. Data is collected at least for the year, throughout the year. Example is hydropower project or a dam construction. Again, both are considered in the category of river valley projects. But how they can be both used at different stage of application. So, the review of rapid EIA submissions can guide us to know whether a comprehensive EIA is required or not. So, if a project is like say related to renewable energy, installation of solar thermal power plant or solar PV power plant, then we are not sure whether it will be having adverse environmental impacts or not. So, in such case doing a rapid quick EIA would help us, and that will tell us whether a detailed EIA is required or not. That will also depend on the location site where that project is going to be installed, whether it is a ecologically sensitive zone or whether it is a normal agricultural land or like industrial land. So, it will depend on those things also. So, that was all about types of EIA. We will not be going into details of other types of EIA, like some EIA are required before the implementation of project, some can be required after implementation of project. There are like strategic EIA or like environmental EIA specific to social EIA. So, those things we will not be covering in this course, but yeah, rapid and EIA comprehensive, these two EIAs you can remember. So, stages of EIA process, how does the overall like a flow chart or workflow looks like. So, for any project proponent, first thing is the identification of proposal. So, once the proposal is identified, like what is the task that is going to be undertaken and what would be the market or what is the purpose, that comes under the proposal identification. And then the first step of EIA comes out to be screening. So, in screening what happens? So, identification is to define a project and study all the likely activities involved in the project, just to know the reach and the range of the project. Okay. That will help in reducing or deciding the possible zones of environmental impacts. So, once this identification is done, proposal is identified, before it is sent for like say reviewing or EIA, it needs to be screened. So, in screening, it determines whether the environmental and social impacts of the proposed project would be significant enough to propose EIA or not. Sometimes in the screening it is found that okay, the project looks fine, it may not have a significant environmental impact, significant social impact. So, it may not need a EIA and the project can be stopped, and the process for EIA can be stopped at that point, that a project does not need EIA. And if it is found that it has significant impacts, so that will need a EIA, and it will depend on the scale of investment, the type of development as well as the location of development. And this screening, it is like a rigorous activity where the entire proposal is scrutinized, and the output of this screening activity is known as initial environmental examination or evaluation, IEE. So, that is a document which is the output of the screening process. After that screening, like as we saw that there is a proposal identification, then we have screening, the first step, the initial environmental examination, that is the output of the screening. and if it appears that the project does not need EIA, so it will stop at that point, no EIA required, and if there is a requirement of EIA, it goes to the next stage of EIA, that is scoping. So, scoping is identifying issues and concerns, deciding the assessment methods, affected parties and inviting public participation wherever there are some debatable issues. So, scoping basically defines the functional boundary or the system boundary of the project, and whatever issues and concerns that would arise related to environment or society, and what are the parties affected and how we are going to like address them, including the public participation. So, that is the scope of the project. It is typically the base or the foundation for determining terms of reference. So, generally state level expert appraisal committee EAC will determine the terms of reference based on the scope or based on the information given in form 1 or form 1A, and it is on the basis of this terms of reference a final EIA or environment management plan EMP would be done. So, once the scoping is done, at the stage of scoping, because we will be talking about the effect of the project to a certain boundary. So, in that it is important to involve community, so that public involvement is there at the stage of scoping, and after the scoping next stage is the impact analysis, and fourth stage is mitigation and impact management. So, impact analysis, it refers to the evaluation of environmental and social impacts of the planned project and alternatives compared to the baseline conditions. So, how do we get baseline conditions? By doing some measurements, like I told you, if it is a rapid EIA, you do measurements for a season, 2-3 months. If it is a comprehensive EIA, we would be doing measurements for 1 year or even more than that. So, those measurements or descriptions can be qualitative in nature or quantitative in nature. So, when we assess or predict the impact, it can be in terms of like say high impact, medium impact, low impact, or we can have the measurements of how much greenhouse gas emissions, how much air emissions, how much contaminants in wastewater, in water, what are the pollutants going to soil, how much, what is the noise level. So, all these measurements comes under the impact assessment. Sometimes it is also called as impact prediction, because we have not put the project in practice yet. We are doing this exercise before the project is being sanctioned or implemented. So, after impact analysis or assessment, there is mitigation and impact management, which includes measures to reduce the identified impacts and prepare the plans required for addressing other project risks such as technological failures or natural disasters. So, once we have identified the impact, there is a need for mitigating or managing those impacts, and for those whatever measures and strategies are required, those would be detailed out at this in this stage of EIA, and it is typically done by a multidisciplinary team of experts who have the necessary skills and qualifications. If they are using the tools of like say life cycle assessment, then they need to have like gather a lot of inventory and lot of data. They may be able to use some software like OpenLCA, CIMA Pro, Gabi. These are the softwares used for conducting LCA, which will help us identify impacts. But once those impacts are identified, the same team who have expertise in those areas may come up with response strategies or mitigation strategies plan, and the main purpose of this is to ensure that the unavoidable impacts are maintained within acceptable levels. So, if there are some impacts which can be avoided, the measures can be suggested for those, but if there are some impacts which cannot be avoided, in that case, if there is a compliance by CPCB or SPCB, for example, like say for particulate matter emission, if there is a limit, for AQI, if there is some limit, and we cannot avoid pollution altogether, but we should be able to maintain it within the acceptable levels. So, for that case, some additional setups and equipments for cleaning those flue gases may be required. So, all those things would be detailed out or reported in the impact mitigation and management stage of EIA. So, after that, after these 4 stages like screening, scoping, impact assessment and impact mitigation, and the details of all these 4 stages will be compiled in the form of a EIA report, which will then go for review, and at the stage of review also the final report would be like considering the public involvement, the public hearing. At the stage of scoping, we had public hearing or public involvement. At the stage of review also public involvement can be done. The public can be involved in any of the stages between scoping to review in many EIA studies. And once that report is reviewed, a decision is made, and if that decision is yes, approved, there will be the project implementation and follow up strategies. If it is not approved, it may be asked, the project proponent or the proposer may be asked to redesign and resubmit the proposal or the EIA report. So, what is report and review exactly? Report is a compilation of several important project components, including project description, environmental and social impact assessment, mitigation measures, and management and monitoring plans. And EIA report is compiled by the project team and its associated consultants according to the terms of reference which were identified during the scoping stage. So, if terms of reference is like the executive summary of the detailed EIA report, and it also details out the scope of the project, the terms of reference. And once that report is prepared in public hearing, it is basically for the community or the public living close to the project site. It is important to understand their views on the impacts of the project proposal, and that will also help make this environmental clearance system more transparent. Okay. Now, how do we get this public hearing? It can be in the form of public consultation or dialogues, or a participation of public, which is a more interactive and intensive way of stakeholder engagement. So, generally it can be done by the project proposer while they are finalizing the site. They can involve or invite the community living nearby or their representatives for a discussion and inform them about the possible project at that location and how it is going to affect them economically, socially, and if it is affecting their environment, what are the measures that they are going to put forward, so that the nearby community is convinced about the impact of that project. Then the review of report, it is again carried out by designated authorities. They will confirm the quality and reliability of the information and methods used in EIA, and they will verify whether the EIA report addresses all the relevant measures and the impacts or not. So, after public hearing and review of report, there was decision making, which is also called as licensing, and it is the outcome of the review. The review will determine whether the project is adequately addressing all the impacts and whether to grant the license or to request some changes in the project or to reject the process. That is the decision making. And last one was post project monitoring and follow up. So, this monitoring component is done by the project proposer or proponent, and this will be done under the supervision of regulatory bodies or independent agencies or government agencies. And this follow up along with this monitoring, it is to ensure that whatever mitigation measures and contingency plans that we had proposed in the EIA report, are they properly being implemented or not. So, this EIA follow up or project monitoring comes after the decision of approval is obtained for the project. So, that completes the flowchart for stages of EIA. So, let us start look at one case study, but before that quickly revising like what are the stages involved in the EIA. First is proposal identification, then screening. In screening, if we decide if it is found that no EIA required, then we stop there. If the initial examination report, if it says like there is a need for EIA, then we go for next stage, that is scoping. Scoping defines the scope of the project, the boundary, and all the activities that would be included in the project as per the terms of reference. After scoping, you identify the impacts, that is impact assessment or analysis. Then impact mitigation and management. Once you identify the impact, you need to mitigate and manage it. And after that, the findings of all these 4 stages or the procedures would be compiled into the form of a EIA report. That EIA report will be reviewed and a decision would be made or licensing would be done. If it is approved, there will be post project monitoring and follow up. If it is not approved, they may ask to redesign and resubmit the process. So, that is how the overall flowchart of EIA looks like. Now, coming to the case study of this picture is from Uttarakhand, Tehri district. So, Tehri hydropower plant. It is a big project of around 1000 megawatt power generation. It is on the Bhagirathi river. It is one of the tributary of river Ganga, and the EIA which was done for this project was obviously comprehensive EIA as it is definitely a river valley project category. Since we have gone through the flowchart of the stages of EIA, we look at this case study from that angle, having each stage of EIA written on the left hand side column, and then there are some details. So, it is not like a comprehensive EIA detailing everything, there are some main key points just to make you understand like what should be included in what stage. So, at screening it is a greater than 25 megawatt project. So, it is a large scale project, greater than 10,000 hectares of catchment area. So, full EIA is mandatory as per the EIA notification 1994. Then scoping, it identified the key issues, it identified all the activities and possible impacts on different components of environment. For example, submergence, displacement of people, seismic risk, because Uttarakhand is like a flood and earthquake prone zone. So, there are a lot of landslides happening in the months of monsoon, biodiversity loss, water quality, cultural impacts. Then baseline study, because it is important for scoping and assessing the impact later. So, data has to be collected for one full year, air, water, soil, forest and socio-economic conditions or the status of people living in that Tehri region was collected for almost one full year. Then for impact prediction, we used they used computer models or some softwares of LCA to predict the impacts on different components of environment. It can be hydrology, sediment transport, ecology. It can also be used to predict impacts on society, the social cultural interaction and the movement of people or displacement, employment, all those things. So, screening, scoping, baseline study, impact prediction. Next is mitigation measures. So, this will have plans developed for resettlement, because this construction of dam and hydropower has lot of resettlement. There has to be proper plan proposed, like where the people would be relocated, then how the catchment treatment, compensatory afforestation, if there is any cutting of trees or forest area, how do we compensate by planting more trees and having the similar green cover. Seismic safety, in case of any seismic disturbances, what are the safety precautions that would be in place. So, those things would come under the mitigation measures. So, impact mitigation measures. Public consultation, this is very important, though it is listed here right after mitigation, it can come at the time of scoping as well as impact assessment or impact mitigation or after preparing report also. So, local people, NGOs and the experts, they were consulted during the construction of the Tehri hydropower project, and all the concerns about displacement, cultural loss were also raised and addressed. Finally, the EIA report preparation and submission, a detailed environment management plan was prepared and submitted to ministry for approval. And monitoring and compliance, it is still going on. There is a regular environmental monitoring of water, soil, air, forest cover, rehabilitation success to show or to prove that whatever was mentioned or predicted in EIA report is being followed. So, that is the monitor and compliance, also sometimes termed as follow up. So, with this, let us summarize today's lecture. We started with what is EIA, like it is a planning and decision making tool to know the likely impacts of a proposed project on society and environment. And then two types of EIA, rapid and comprehensive. In the stages of EIA, we saw the entire flow chart, though there are four main stages: screening, scoping, impact assessment and impact mitigation. But in the flow chart, there are many more things like preparing report, reviewing, decision making and post monitoring, compliance, follow up. And finally, we saw a case study of a Tehri hydropower project with respect to the stages of EIA, like what are the details, some key points in each stage of EIA project. So, thank you so much.